Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on specialist versus generalist HR. This is an important topic for many of you as you consider your career paths and navigate the evolving HR landscape. Should you develop a broad range of HR skills, or should you specialise in a particular area? What are the benefits and trade-offs of each path, and how do businesses value these roles? I'm Amanda Arrowsmith. I am the People and Transformation Director at the CIPD, and I am delighted to be joined today to explore these questions with two fantastic HR leaders. First, we have Daniel Chan, Senior Wellbeing and Employee Experience Manager at QBE, and we're also joined by Kirsty Kern, HR Director at Bourgeois. Before we dive into discussion, I'm going to invite Daniel and Kirsty to introduce themselves, share a bit about their career journeys, and where they sit on the generalist versus specialist debate. Kirsty, perhaps you'd like to kick us off.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone from Dubai. Nice to meet you all on the call, and thanks for taking the time to break out and listen to some advice that we have to share with you today. My name is Kirsty Kern. I'm the Group Chief HR Officer for Bourgeois International, an international beverages company. I started my career back about 20 years ago at an large FMCG company in Mozambique, after doing my master's degree in Warwick Business School. And back then, the master's was called not HR, but Industrial Relations and Personnel Management. So the degree has progressed somewhat over the last 2 decades. And with that, I was given the opportunity to study CIPD with my master's degree. So I really had a combo. And I think the having those two at the start of my career really were very helpful in the choices that were made when these FMCG companies had offered me positions, and I had a variety of options to choose from. So I think that was really helpful. I started in payroll as my first job, really getting my hands dirty in a factory environment of a large tobacco company. And from there, I really progressed in the company across different generalist and specialist positions. I went through OD and organizational effectiveness, talent roles, commercial sales capability positions. So I actually moved out of HR for a short period of time and into marketing and sales to learn how to build development programs for that specific function. And then I moved back into generalist roles, the more senior that I moved into the up the company. And I also double-hatted in quite a few project positions, especially during key expansions or contractions that we had in the company over that time. And I then moved to South Africa, where I headed up the trade marketing division for HR. And being recognized as a high potential talent, I moved to Dubai as an international assignee, or as a secondee back then. And that really just ignited my career. From Dubai, I moved into a variety of different industries, having family company experience, privately owned, private equity, logistics, warehousing. And now I find myself back in an FMCG environment. And throughout my career, I actually did use the CIPD professions map to support me with either development or choices that I wanted to make. And I think 2 years ago, I had finished my chartered fellow.
Fantastic. So you've had a really long, varied career. I love the fact that you've kind of come in and out of HR, and you can show how that really adds to the value to the business. Daniel, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your career history, your career journey, and maybe talk about where you sit on this generalist versus specialist debate.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Daniel, and I didn't start my career in HR. I started my career off as a nurse. So in the UK, started off with the NHS, that's the government sector, public sector, and did that for around about 6 or 7 years. Then took a step into what we call occupational health. So looking at how we can support HR, so how we support the business, and really looking at the health of the person or the employee and really understanding their needs, but how we can support them come back to work or provide opportunities to support them in the workplace and outside. Um, I guess what really brought me into the world of HR was that step in, but then also I went to work for an investment bank, a Japanese investment bank, where I was a corporate nurse. But I actually was the corporate health sector. We fell under HR. And that's why I really started to understand how health really affects the business, not only from an employee level, but also from a business level as well. And that's what really got me interested in how I could really use my health knowledge from a business aspect. Back then, we were just starting, I guess, in well-being or wellness, or wellness. So it was a very light touch, and I realized this was an area that I really, really enjoyed, not only from a commercial sense, but also from a business and also from using my health knowledge as well. I then decided I wanted to understand health, well-being, cultures, and I moved out to Hong Kong, where I worked in more of a consulting capacity. So I worked for insurers and brokers, realizing that they were an area that were growing in well-being, and Asia at that time. I supported the internal business in terms of building out the wellness proposition, but I also consulted with our global clients who were generally HR directors, building out their well-being strategies, and really understanding how well-being looked from a regional lens, but also from a cultural aspect as well, how we kind of need to be aware of all of that as well. I then come back to the UK and worked back in an in-house role, where I worked for a global marketing advertising agency, and I really was in a global role building out their global strategy for them across around 140 different markets. And today I work at QB, which is an insurance company, as their senior wellbeing and employee experience manager, where I oversee the wellbeing for international level, and also that employee experience as well. So I've had a very varied career, I would say, coming from not an HR background, coming from a very specific health background, but I've really learned how to utilize my health knowledge into where I am today. In terms of where I sit, I guess you can see I sit on the more specialist level, more within the Centre of Excellence around well-being and around employee experience. And that's where I have done, I guess, so for the past, I guess, 6 or 7 years.
Fantastic. So as we move into our discussion, we're really interested to hear questions from the students that have joined us today. We got this fantastic experience with us today. So they're here to answer your questions. So please don't be shy. Pop your questions into the system. We'll have a look at those as we go through, and we'll try and answer them as we go through rather than have a formal Q&A at the end. So please do put your questions in there. But perhaps to kick us off, let's talk about how we would define the role of an HR generalist versus an HR specialist. Obviously, Danny, you've talked about your specialism role there. But Kirsty, perhaps you could start by explaining, when you think about an HR generalist, what does that mean and how do they contribute to an organisation?
So I think for me, a nice statement to use is a jack of all trades and a master of none. Without being offensive to any generalist that might be on the call, but that's the easiest way to express it for me. It's being a generalist in an organization is somebody who really understands the business landscape, and can match your people challenges, your people needs to that business landscape or that business strategy. Throughout your career as a generalist, it is important to go into some of the specialized areas so that you can understand the policies, the processes, the systems that go with it. But as a generalist, you're there to serve the employees, you're there to serve the organization. So I certainly sit on the generalist scale. It is my passion, and I believe that there's quite a lot of versatility in this let's say the generalization of the position itself. And from a personality type, if you're an extrovert, and you want to engage with people on a daily basis and lots of different personalities, it's definitely a role that is something that I went into, and some of the reasons why I went into that. lots of different relationships that you can build with line managers and employees.
Yeah, I'm also a generalist, and I like the second part of that quote that people don't often mention, because the full quote is "Jack of all trades, master of none, but oftentimes better than master of one." So I think, isn't it? Let's put my cards on the table. I'm biased. I'm a generalist. I've been a generalist my whole career, all 30 years, and there is that whole oftentimes better than master of one. So Daniel, let's hear it for the specialist. What is a specialist when we talk about an HR specialist?
I guess you talk about a specialist as someone who has a specific amount of experience within that one defined or maybe two defined areas. So, for example, if you look at myself, I guess my specialism is well-being, and also employee experience. And that's the thing I love. And I think the comes through the passion you have for the area, in terms of wanting to make an impact, wanting to help people, wanting to make things better, wanting to make that environment better. And that's what's really driven me and my passion around kind of specializing in this one, a specialist in this one area. So yeah, I really say it's about having that knowledge and that specialism where you can not only help the business in lead and direct them in, but that allow and using your knowledge to make them understand kind of the importance of it, and what needs to be done to drive that agenda forward.
So when we think
sorry, when I guide people in the company and my teams around specialism and generalization of HR, we often talk about breadth. So, as an HR generalist, you generally have a breadth of experience across your people function as well as your organization, whereas your specialism in terms of your talent or your OD or your employee well-being, etc., you generally build a depth of knowledge over a period of time. So that's something we often speak about as well.
Daniel, you mentioned centre of excellence, I think there. Can you just give us a bit of a description of what a centre of excellence might be?
Yeah, so I guess that centre of excellence is really a department, or I would say a function or a group of people, that have specialist, I guess, roles within that. So if you look at perhaps an employee experience centre of excellence, which I sit in, that may consist of well-being, diversity and inclusion, culture, engagement. Perhaps if you look at reward, centre of excellence, that might be reward, benefits, total rewards, etc. So maybe a collective group of specialists that fall into that one category that can align to that one business strategy or one approach.
And Kirsty, how might a generalist work with, or I hesitate to use the word use, but how might they work and collaborate with a centre of excellence?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a critical relationship. Me being a generalist, generally, I've had, the majority of specialist functions reporting into myself. The higher up you go in terms of your leadership and your management positions. Today, I have reward reporting into me. I have talent. I have OD, well-being. So I have the full range, governance, policy compliance. The relationship is extremely important because, like I mentioned, we're not the experts in all these fields. And particularly if you're working in specific different geographies, as an example, you need your specialists because they've got the depth of knowledge, they've got the country knowledge, they've got the regulatory knowledge, they've got the fiscal or the legal knowledge. That does really enable your generalists to partner with the business in a much more fluid way and probably in a more successful way in terms of how they guide and advise.
So do you think you only find the specialists and generalists in large organisations, or can that sometimes be the same in medium or smaller organisations? What do you think, Daniel?
I don't think it really matters really. I think we see it more in large organizations because there's a need perhaps. But I think we do see it in smaller organizations. And perhaps in smaller organizations, you perhaps see specialists take on dual roles, for example. So maybe well-being and D&I, so you have more of the understanding across two areas and things. So we do see that. So I don't see it's restricted into the company. I guess it depends on what the company direction is, but also kind of what their key focus areas are and resource to help support that as well. So I think it can be varied really. I've seen, we have specialists and generalists in small companies I've worked with, but also then on a larger scale, we don't have specialists in place as well. So I think it's so varied at the moment. I think that's what makes it exciting about the people function or HR function in a whole, that it's such a varied, I guess, profession, isn't it? And it's really dependent on the makeup of the company.
I like that, because that kind of goes. We had a question about whether you can combine specialisms. One of the questions we had was, can you combine learning and development with well-being? And you're already combining well-being with employee engagement. And Kirsty, I don't know about what happens in your organisation or organisations you've worked in, but can you see those specialisms? I think we've talked about with smaller, but I'm not sure it's necessarily set, is it? Sometimes when we think about talent, that can be recruitment, that can be development, that can be a combination. So, Kirsty, perhaps talk about where you've seen them combined, or where you've seen them with kind of quite defined lines between them.
I think in larger organizations where you have probably more access to funds, and you can fund the HR function in a way that you would like to, because there's higher profitability. In medium to smaller size companies that I've been part of, you definitely do combine the generalist with specialists. So, for example, I've moved into a corporate VP business partnering role, and I've taken on corporate communications, both internal and external, as an example. I've been a head of HR with a bolt-on title of internal communications. As HR generalists, we're there to be change leaders. Communications goes alongside that. Likewise, in picking my team today, as a good example, there's a limited headcount as we're starting up our new corporate center. So I've actually combined our total reward role with systems, because the skill set of somebody who's got the reward capability and has come through reward fully understands an Excel spreadsheet, numbers, analytics, as well as the systems that support compensation cycles from end to end. Likewise, on my talent side, I've combined talent and OD, or culture. In other organizations, these roles are split depending on the workload and depending on the business strategy.
And Daniel, you've got wellbeing and employee experience together where you are. So talk to us a bit about the links there, and perhaps bits that are some of that might be purely wellbeing and some that might be employee experience. Tell us a bit about how that works.
Yeah, so as I said, I oversee both. And when we look at employee experience and well-being, you've got to think that encompasses the whole of the employee life cycle, really. Because what we're looking at employee experiences, we're looking at how people feel, kind of their voice within the company, but also want them to thrive within the company as well. And those really encompass the elements of employee well-being and experience in allowing that. So I guess when I look at my role if I look at the employee experience side, that's really understanding the employee voice. So it's really understanding, whether from engagement, our employee surveys, kind of what are these key moments that matter, and how do you get those right the way through that candidate experience. So when you apply, when you say apply for that job, has all the information been given to that employee? Are we a candidate? Are we giving that candidate all the information they need to understand the company, the values, etc., so it aligns with them? Right the way through them, from perhaps if they leave the company to the retire, and all the things in between, is that like career development, etc., and then looking at our well-being. I guess where well-being fits in is because we're looking at employee experience and trying to improve that and make it better. We all know of well-being, if we get it right, we have happier employees, don't we? So we want people to come into work, we know work is good for us. I think Peter mentioned that in the keynote this morning, didn't he, around work is good for us. We want people to come to work feeling energized, kind of productive, but we also want them to thrive in the workplace as well. And that's where well-being comes into it. And, well-being encompasses so much now across the employee spectrum, doesn't it? From your physical to your mental to financial. We're even linking in things like environmental, kind of with our social impact, our ESG. So all of these elements that we're seeing, there's a well-being strand to it. And then that aligns probably to the employee experience as well. So again, that's where my two areas sit. I would say that's how they're defined, but they're very, very interlinked with everything we do.
We've got some great questions coming in, so I'm going to ask you some of those if we can. One of the questions we've been asked is, do you think that there'll be a need for HR specialists in the future It seems that HR professionals will need to develop their skills to leverage IT, information, and data. And that kind of picks on some of the things you've both talked about, rather than be the expert or knowledge holder in the room. Because you talked about having your talent and your systems, I think it was, together. Talk to us about that. Do you think we will have specialists in the future, or are we democratizing all this knowledge?
We will definitely have specialists, primarily because we need to have human beings solving problems.
Yeah.
I don't think that everything can be given to technology. And certainly in the last 20 years, when I started my career, this, AI was called something else. We were moving into the automation phase, and it hasn't taken over any of the jobs to date. Likewise, it's actually made, with the advancement of technology, we've actually become even more, let's say, polarized across the world, right? So we can use it to bring us together, but we still need the specialists and the specialist capability, not only to enhance ourselves in the workplace, but also to enhance, businesses in future, for sure.
What are you thinking, Daniel?
No, I totally agree. I think technology is great. I think the advancements in AI as we're seeing is going to help us, but we work in a people function. We are people. And I think with that, emotions, feelings, how people react, how people interact on a day-to-day basis, that's something I don't think technology or AI is going to be able to fundamentally change. And like we said, our thoughts, emotions that we have change on a daily basis, minute, hour, don't they? Which I don't think technology will be able to help that. So I think, we need to look at technology and AI as an enabler, how it can support our everyday work and make things, not only improve things or make it better for us, but we will always need that human touch, that human element to it, which comes in all of the roles that we do today. So I don't think will ever take that away. I think we need to see it as an enabler and how it can really support ourselves in the workplace.
I'll give you
Fantastic.
another example, Amanda. Sorry, the ChatGPT, it's a really good and relevant example. I mean, back in the day that, there was nothing like that. And I would go onto the CIPD website, and I was in Mozambique, I was in a third world country, so even access to the internet was already a challenge for me. And I was going on, I was looking at, well, how do I understand policy and, talent policy or performance management policy? How do I upskill myself? And, today you can just ask ChatGPT. So, in our roles as specialists or in our roles as generalists, writing policy. So a pure example, we've just written our group performance accountability policy. You can put that on ChatGPT, it can spit out a policy for you, but can it make it relevant to your workplace? You still need to have that conversation with your business. You still need to have those engagement sessions to make sure that you're customizing your people process or your people solution to what's required.
Yeah, it's like having a fantastic encyclopedia or a fantastic access to information, but you still need to actually make it human. And I think that's the great thing about it. It can help you to it can get you past that blank piece of paper, can't it? So it can help you to get into thinking about what you need and maybe help you to form something. But the reality is it's going to be, you need context, you need to be specific to your industry, to your people. But also, I love the way you both have mentioned human. We're dealing with people. It's one of the things I love about being a generalist. No 2 days are the same. I can't tell you what's going to happen Monday, Tuesday. I was asked recently to do a thing about my day in the life of HR. And I found myself talking about when I had coffee and when I did certain things. I don't know what's going to happen every day. I can see what's in the diary, and we have stuff that happens by route, don't we? So we know when our payroll will be, we know when our surveys will be. There are things we know, but actually, the greatest thing about humans is they're not widgets. It's also some of the hardest things about humans, but it's the greatest thing. I've had 2 questions that are quite different, but also I think really linked. So the first one is, should you choose a specialism that you are interested in, but maybe not naturally skilled in, or should you go with your natural skill set? And then the second one is, do you need any specialist skills to be either a generalist or a specialist? So should I go into a specialism that I'm really interested in, but not naturally skilled in? And do you have any particular skills or attributes that you need to be a generalist or a specialist? Daniel, I'm going to start with you with the 2 parts of that question. Perhaps we can have a chat about that.
Yeah, I think if I look at my own personal experience, I went into this area because I was passionate about it. And I had a real desire or want to help people, and I wanted to support people and change people's well, create healthier workplaces, really. I think you do need I would personally say you do need a passion in some of these specific areas, my specialisms, because that's what really drives you and motivates me to learn more, and really improve my knowledge around this area. So, I'm always the world of well-being, employee experience changes on a daily basis, doesn't it? As we all know, and we've heard earlier on. So that's to have that interest there kind of really drives me to understand kind of what are the new initiatives out there, what's the new evidence out there. And I think perhaps if you don't have that interest, that may not drive you to want to learn more around it. And I do think once you get into this area, though, you can learn the skills as well. Because I think, we're all, it's a fundamental part of your own well-being is to be able to learn new knowledge, to gain new experience, isn't it? So you can learn the skills how to develop or drive well-being in an organization, develop a well-being strategy that fits your cultural, your employee demographics and needs. So I would say you do need that interest to get
Yeah.
you to drive you to want to understand and want to learn more. So that would be, and that's a token from my own personal experience as well.
What are you thinking, Kirsty?
For the first part of the question, I am of the mindset that you should challenge yourself. I think if you know you've got a skill and that you're good at it, why not learn something else? Why not push the boundary and, push yourself to, be a specialist in some part of your career, outside of your comfort zone. I think that's a big one for growth. Certainly, I've done that throughout my career. Even though the imposter syndrome can, get the better of you sometimes, push yourself and learn something new, especially if you're early on in your career. Give yourself a good foundation. That would certainly be my advice. But I think I'm a product of that. I think I could have stayed in talent. I absolutely love it. But I jumped in between a couple of roles, as I explained. The second part of the question, what can you repeat it again, please?
So what sort of skills and attributes do you need if you're either a specialist or a generalist? Are they different? Are there particular skills you need in particular areas?
From a generalist point of view, there's definitely skills that are required, like relationship skills, very important. You need to be able to have build a good business acumen and understanding, all the functions and how they fit together and the value chain of your company. Influencing skills are a huge skill set that you need, because you, as a people professional, you need to be selling. You need to be able to sell. So I think the selling skill and the influencing skill are critical. And the execution skill, the skill of execution. So you need to be able to take a solution or an idea, turn it into a solution, and then be able to implement it or execute it very well. So that I would say those on the generalist side. On the specialist side, it's about depth. So if you're a total reward expert, you have to know your external environment. You have to stay up to speed with what's going on in talent, reward, learning and development, leadership, well-being, employee experience, everything. So you have to know what the market or the global environment is, the new work around the global environment, and bring that to your workplace. So you need the skill set of, I think, curiosity, learning, you're learning something new every month, and networking. So you need to network yourself outside to make sure that you're gaining that knowledge and that information for bringing that to your role and to your workplace. Definitely there's soft skills that are required for both. And I think, the specialist also has to influence, but probably doesn't have to necessarily influence the business. If you're not business facing, you probably have to influence your HR leader or your team. So I think there are skill sets that do span across on the softer side.
Daniel, you're nodding along there. Talk to us a bit about that, because I want my specialists to have really deep subject matter knowledge. I want them to be the experts in that area. As a generalist, I recognise I kind of have a bit of everything, but I want my specialists to bring that expert knowledge. How do you recommend people stay up to date? How do you do that in wellbeing and employee experience?
Yeah, so I'm part of a lot of networks. So I think kind of I would really advise you to join communities around that. There's lots of communities on LinkedIn. I'm part of a lot of wellbeing communities of where all peers who get together, and we actually get together, have virtual coffees all the time, just to touch base. I think when you're in a specialist role, it can be quite lonely, because sometimes you are that lone person within your company, and sometimes you just need to give your peer a call, say, "Am I doing this right? Am I on the right track?" Because then you can bounce ideas off. So like Claire said, network is so important. So find your communities on either LinkedIn or kind of locally as well, or through CIPD, that you've got lots of communities going. I said connect to people on LinkedIn who are doing similar roles, reach out to them, just ask them a few questions. We're all willing to learn. And what I've noticed in the past few years, we're all willing to share more. And because we're all in the same difficult space together. Go to conferences. There are lots of conferences around, and not just perhaps around just well-being or around HR. Look at the conferences perhaps outside because they'll be touching on these different areas. So I've been to some around data and tech. That's incorporating well-being, and that's been really interesting to see that from a different lens, but then also allows you to take that into the business as well. And then just research articles. There are lots of articles coming out around employee well-being, that employee experience, sector. So again, just keeping up to date with what's relevant. There is a lot of information out there. I know. So it's about picking and choosing what's right for you, and how you interpret that to take it back to your business. But that's a few of the how I really, keep myself up to date, and keep my knowledge going. But I'd say the biggest one for me is around networking, and building your own community around you of the people you can go to ask you or go to ask those questions that you need.
I think that's a really good, yeah, it's really key. We're very fortunate in the CIPD, so we have our online communities. So if you go onto the CIPD website, wherever you are in the world, you can join those communities. There is actually some really great student community areas if you are a student, but also if you're interested in particular subject matter, there's those. The other thing I would recommend is that if you've got branches, which I know we don't have in the Middle East, but we do have branches here across the UK, GB Northern Ireland, and we have branches in Ireland. So if you've got the opportunity to go to branch events, some of them have special interest groups, but they'll be running sessions on different branch events. I attended one in online, actually, Southeast London a couple of weeks ago that was about sustainability at work. It was fascinating, that kind of link between HR and sustainability, which I knew about, but perhaps didn't have the deep understanding. And we're so fortunate with our branch volunteers. We've got this amazing group of people who, well, people like yourself who come and volunteer their time on a Saturday morning, but we have all these people who volunteer their time in the evenings, come share their knowledge, and they are happy to. We have our own events as well, and there's specialist events. We have a wellbeing conference, we have a data analytics conference, there was a reward and talent conference last week. So there are those conferences there. But when we think about the people we've got here today, so it's students, and they could be at any point in their career. I only did my master's year before last, so I was a student after however many years of working. But a lot of our students are quite early in their career, so they're early career HR professionals, or perhaps they've switched into HR. What do you think about how they move into that? So obviously, Daniel, you moved into HR as a specialist and came in that route. Kirsty, you've talked about the fact that you would love to specialize in talent sometimes, and you've done some talent specialists and you've done different things. When we're thinking about students in their early career, what would you recommend in terms of generalist, specialist? Should they stay broad? What should they do? Daniel, perhaps you could talk a bit about your experience and what you'd recommend.
Yeah, so I would say that I've always considered myself going into that specialist area, given my skill set, but also given my background and experience. I think, if you're as an early career student, really think about, I said, think about the kind of area you want to perhaps work in, but also understand that within, say for myself, within the area that I specialize in, there's so many different areas I could go into, from a local role to a regional role to a global role. And I've worked in all three, and all three will give you different experiences, different challenges. and that's only not only broadened my, knowledge and horizon, but also allowed me to think about what I want my next steps in my career. So again, even though you perhaps, I wouldn't say pigeonhole, but think about, I'm saying, even if you think about I want to specialize just in well-being, there's also, you can branch out to think about kind of what those roles could look like, and also within the companies as well. So I've worked in insurance, I've worked in the finance sector, I've worked in marketing and advertising, and they're completely different industries, as a sense. And that again, when you work in a specialism, as a specialist, really allows you then to think about, what could the issues and challenges be within that industry? Is it different to that? And again, that can bring you great great knowledge, and also give you experiences as well. So I think if you're really starting out in your career, like for me, how I did this, it was going to specialism, but as I've grown and as I've gone through my career, I've tested out in different industries. I've tested out in different roles, like I said, from local to global roles. And that's what's made it exciting for me.
Yeah.
And that's what's really I guess, kept me motivated, really. So that's from my own personal experience as well. So if you are thinking about going into being a specialist, there are lots of different avenues you can take within that specialism.
Kirsty, what do you think? What would you say to early career HR professionals? Should they stay broad, or should they specialize early on in their careers?
I think you know what I'm going to say. So for me, I would stay broad if it's early career. I would spend as much time as you can getting a really good foundation across the people function and understanding then what I call, with majority of my teams throughout my careers, I call it the nuts and bolts of HR, is really understand, there's three things. It's policy, process, and system. It's not complex. So understand in every function, your policy, your process, and your system, and understand what it takes to draft the policy, put it into a process, put that policy into a system, and then execute it. So then you can talk from a foundational level around talent. You can talk around compensation cycles. You can talk about, salary increases. You can talk about leadership and development, etc. So that's, I would get the foundational knowledge, and then you have the opportunity then to pick if you want to go into your certain specialization. But I think also it also takes a makeup of somebody as well, in terms of how curious. I think there's a question mark around your early career and where you want to go, but how hungry are you and how ambitious are you? So if you think that you can go straight into a specialist or reward role, then also do that, because if you're hungry for it, you will be successful. If you learn the right things, you absorb, you listen to the right people, you keep your network as wide as possible for a specialist role, as Daniel had been mentioning, you will be successful. And more than not, you'll probably go through a vertical career than a lateral career in a specialist versus a generalist role. That would be my advice.
And if you want to be a chief people officer or HR director, can you do that from a specialist route, or do you think that happens from a more generalist route? Or could it be your career could be both? How does that work?
For me, it's definitely a generalist route. I'm not saying it can't be done from a specialist route, but the people that I have seen move from specialism into a chief people officer role, there tend to be gaps in knowledge and experience. Can it be developed? Of course it can. I think it all depends on the person. But I think if you have to look at this from I start an X role and then I want to move all the way through the right career path into a chief people officer role, then definitely through the generalist space. In the same token, the more specialism you can move into and execute throughout your career moves, the better, the more well-rounded you will be as a chief people officer, because you'll have the business side and you'll have the people side.
So pivoting perhaps sometimes in your career. So I know, for example, I say I've been a generalist for all my career, but I spent a couple of those years doing transformation and change roles, which I think is, for me, it helps me being a generalist, because I understood a bit of ER, I understood about business partnering, I understood about L&D, I understood about talent, I understood about well-being and experience. But actually, I was able to bring all of that into a change lens. When we think about how we develop in our careers, I think it's that sometimes that project work and looking at different things, but I'm not sure. We've talked today about kind of almost like a binary, specialist or generalist. I'm not sure it's quite that black and white. I think a lot of what we do in HR is in those grey areas. Daniel, you've talked about well-being and employee experience, but you have to understand learning and development. You have to understand talent. You've got to understand onboarding. You talked a bit about onboarding anyway as part of that. So you are a specialist, but you have to understand the other areas, surely.
Yeah, those I do. So I work alongside all the other centers of excellence, like you said, like learning, talent, our reward, our benefits. I work really closely with them. And I have to understand what they do as well, but how I can build that in. So again, even though I'm a specialist, I do have, I'd say, knowledge of the other areas. And that's what I think is so varied about these roles, isn't it? Even though you call yourself a specialist, you do have to work alongside all the other areas of the people function. Otherwise, we can't work in silos, can we? We can't bring everything together. And that's what makes this role really exciting. And like I said, I have have an understanding of benefits, have an understanding of talent. Do I want to go and work in those areas? I'm not sure. But having that understanding at least allows me then to support my role and to drive what I need to drive within that people agenda around my role as well, which is really important. And again, that gives me exposure to the other areas as well, to go, when I have my career development discussions, do I think about, could I do a benefits role perhaps? Or do a D&I role, because there are such interlinks of well-being. Because I've had that exposure, at least it sets those cogs turning. Is it something I want to develop? Is it something how I could see my career going in the future and things? So you do have to have an understanding of the other areas of the people function, definitely. And that's what I think a specialist role can give you. Not as in depth as like Kirsty and kind of generalist roles as you would do, and as you said, but I would say also take advantage of the projects you have on board. So what I've done in the past, I've joined projects that's given me great exposure, like you said, into the talent space as well, because that really allows you to broaden your knowledge. And then that helps you, again, as you build out your strategies, how that fits into your strategy, how that fits into the other strategy, but also the wider people and business strategy as well.
As we come towards the end of our session, it's gone really quickly. I am really keen that we leave the guys that have joined us say we didn't get to all the questions. I'm very sorry we didn't get to the question about why we don't get to do fun stuff as generalists. I believe we do get to do fun stuff as generalists. And if you don't think you're doing the fun stuff, just put yourself in there. Do the fun stuff. Allow yourself to do the fun stuff. We're not there as the fun police as generalists. I know we feel like that sometimes. We're genuinely not. You can do that. But I'm really keen that we leave these brilliant people that have taken their time, like you have on a Saturday morning, to join us, Saturday afternoon, Kirsty, with perhaps some real tips and hints about what they can do to really give themselves the best foundation to start their career as a generalist or a specialist. So, Kirsty, I'm going to ask you what you think the students can do to help themselves as a generalist. And then, Daniel, I'm going to ask you what you think they can do to help themselves as a specialist. So, Kirsty, maybe you can start for us.
Yeah, I'm going to say something that probably sounds a bit contradictory, but as a generalist, be an expert. And what I mean by that is I've followed a lot of models in my career, besides from the professions map, but Ulrich as one of the obviously the key fathers of HR. And he talks about infrastructure, systems. He talks about being the employee voice as well as change and strategy. So he's got these 4 boxes. And I kind of live that, and I mentor and I coach through that with my teams. So be the expert in those areas, build your foundational blocks. I think that's the key part. The second part on a personal front is take feedback, ask for feedback, learn how to receive feedback, because it really is a gift. And if you don't learn from the early start of your career that feedback is a gift, and you're going to beat yourself up every time you get feedback. So take feedback as a gift, go away and think about it. And how can you improve yourself for the future? How can you improve how you deliver for the business or your line managers. And also, if you can, get yourself a coach and develop self-awareness, because the role of HR has only got tougher and tougher and tougher for me over the last 2 decades. I think it's going to get even harder. We're expected to not only be the people professionals, but we're also expected to be, the psychologist and the listener and the mom and the dad and the doctor and the this. And we have so many hats as a generalist that we need to have on. On Friday morning, I walked into the office and I ended up coaching somebody on their relationship with their other, the other half. And that's not something that you think that you would do in the workplace, but that was impacting their day. And that would have impacted the performance of that person during that day. So as you said, Amanda, a generalist role is day to day. You can't, you don't know what's coming your way. So self-awareness, take the feedback and become an expert in your field.
Thank you. Daniel, what advice would you give people who want to go into a specialist role?
I agree with kind of case on everything, but also I think as well the self-awareness, take feedback. I think the big thing is network. There are a lot of specialists out there, so really network with them, understand their roles, because when doing a specialist role, it can be quite difficult. There are lots and lots of challenges and stakeholder management. I think we all, for example, well-being, we all see it could be quite fun. It is fun. We do lots of great things for employees, but there's a lot of challenges that come, like I said, business cases, stakeholder management with my chief people officer, etc. So again, there are lots of challenges that do come with these roles that we perhaps don't really think about, because we see the well-being or employee experience. We may see a lot of time we see the outcomes and the impact it can have. So again, network with people, understand, talk to them, understand their roles, what makes them, what drives them to do the role, kind of what makes them tick, kind of what these challenges are. And again, I think the last thing is when you're looking at a specialist role, think about how it aligns to your own values and how it aligns to you. Because like I said, for me personally, that's what's really driven me to want to carry on doing a specialist role like this, but also drives me to actually make a difference within the companies I work for.
I love that. Thank you so much. It's such a great way to end. I'm so sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. There were so many of them. Please do join the CIPD student community. There'll be an opportunity there for you to ask these questions. And if there's anything that we haven't answered that you really want to ask, please post them there. We'll do our best to get to those. I love working in HR. I'm so proud to work in HR, and I'm fortunate enough to work at the CIPD. But also, I know that sometimes working in HR, we people are always like, well, what's that? Or is that hiring and firing people? We do so much more than that. It's such a great career to be in. It's such a great opportunity. I'm so pleased you joined us today. I hope you enjoy the final keynote session. Thank you so much to Kirsty and Daniel for joining us and for giving up their time to share their information and their perspectives on the career journey. Hope you have a great rest of the day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Take care.